welcome to Man's Model Moments. Now today I'm bringing you a long overdue video on Outlaw Paints. These are acrylic lacquer paints that have some excellent properties I want to demonstrate to you today. To do that, I'm going to be using the old tool 1/48 scale Bf109 from Airfix, part of the old dogfight double set I picked up from the Salisbury Model show last year. As you can see, I've thrown this together with a minimum of preparation. I haven't washed the sprues, and I've filled small gaps with sprue goo. I'm going to use this to demonstrate three main advantages I see in using Outlaw paints. The first of these is ease of use. The second is speed. And the third is durability. So let's get cracking. I'm using RLM02 here, and as you can see, Outlaw paints are decanted directly into the airbrush with no dilution. They're ready to go after a quick shake of the bottle. As they use organic solvents, they're low viscosity, so I'm using a pressure of about 15 psi here. This allows good airbrush control, and as they also have high pigment density, you can see I'm not having to make a lot of passes or repeat coats to get my coverage. Now I've slowed down the footage here to normal speed to demonstrate a couple of those properties I mentioned earlier. You can see I'm painting the inside of one of the undercarriage doors here. Once it's done, I'm going to put it down whilst I secure my airbrush, and there are no cuts in the footage here, as I hope you can tell from the light and the shadows. I then come in to show this is dry after 15 seconds. It's not just touch dry either, and I'll come back to that point later. After quickly finishing the other parts that need RLM02, it's time to clean up, and because there's no dilution or mixing of the paint here, the unused paint can go straight back into the bottle, as I'm doing here. The only thing you really need to be careful of is not to knock the bottle over whilst you're doing this, as they're quite tall. Now I mentioned that point about not just being touch dry, and I'm hopefully going to show that a couple of times in this video. At this point I'm just coming in with an oil wash straight after spraying these pieces, and just slathering it all over. After about 20 minutes of that to dry, you can see there's no effect on the base paint. And then coming back in with a shaped cotton bud to remove the excess wash from the raised surfaces. These are quite hard, and I'm not being very careful as I really wanted to push things here. You can see the paint holding up pretty well. It's not being rubbed off the piece, and we've quickly built up some depth here. Onto the exterior now, and after finishing the build I'm going to start with yellow, a colour many have issues with. You can see I've masked all the areas I need, and again there's been zero surface prep here. I'm just coming in and giving an even coat to all these surfaces. With the fast drying time, I'm able to come in again and just give a second light coat where needed, and it's done in less than 2 minutes. Onto the main underside exterior now, and RLM65 light blue. I wanted to highlight a couple of things here. Firstly, I've obviously masked all the prior areas to protect the yellow identification stripes. Secondly, you can see this old kit is in Airfix's old light blue styrene, and I filled gaps with dark green sprue goo. This just happened to be what I had around, but it's handy as it demonstrates the paint's covering power, which is down to that high pigmentation. You can see I'm only giving this a single coat, although I do have to refill the airbrush as I underestimated the paint I'd need, and I prefer spraying with less paint in the cup as I'm quite clumsy in spilling it. I do give a quick light mist again to that area, but it's just to even out any inconsistencies in my first passes, and again, that quick drying time gives you the ability to assess that on the fly. So we're finished with the main underside painting in just under 3 minutes, and I'm now taking the excess paint out of the airbrush and cleaning it. Whilst that's happening, I'm going to explain a few other elements I've been showing. Firstly, I've shown what speed the footage is running at, so you can see the reality of what I'm doing and try to show I'm not fudging anything here with clever editing. Secondly, I've had timers running to show how much time has elapsed for certain steps, which is kind of obvious, but I'll pull all that together later. Thirdly, you may wonder why we are just sitting here now, literally watching paint dry. Well, I'm only going to do this a couple of times here, but I wanted to show you this piece of footage completely uncut. I'll show you a picture of that later, to definitively prove the times here, in case some people think I'm trying to pull a fast one. In any case, you can see the paint is now dry, and I'm now removing the masking from the wing markings. What I'm doing off camera now is trying to find my masking tape, because here's the important piece. I'm masking off the just finished painted light blue, coincidentally after exactly the same amount of time it took to paint it. I've now increased to 6 times speed, as this is just me messing about masking the aircraft, and I've let things move to a less than optimum camera position because I'm focused on the task rather than on filming it. I've shown you the important part already though, the time between painting and masking. More exterior paint now, and more RLMO2. You can see I've masked the light blue on the fuselage, tail and underside of the horizontal stabilizers, though I've been a bit more slapdash with the undersides of the wings, and I'm relying a lot more on being careful with my spraying angles. As we're using between 10 and 15 psi to spray, that's easy to do because you're generally getting less overspray generation. As you can see, as I come in over the top of the fuselage, where I have that sprue goo filler, the coverage over differential surfaces is really good. Of course, if you do get any unevenness in the finish, it's easy to spot almost immediately and come back in and even things up. Now there's a bit of a pause here while I adjust some slightly awkward masking around the stabilizers, but I'm counting all of that in the painting time. A few passes over areas where my airbrushing technique has been shown wanting, and we're done in a little over 2.5 minutes. Once again, I'm cleaning the airbrush and getting things in order off screen here, but this time I bumped up the speed to 6 times normal so you're not waiting around forever as you're familiar with the drill now. I think I pick up the plane here just to show it's dry and talk about the finish, but I'll come to that later as it's a bit out of sync just here. Anyway, after 3.5 minutes, I get my big head right in the way of the shot as I start masking the splinter pattern on the wings. Thankfully, I move the aircraft up a bit whilst I take a closer look at the masking pattern, but you get the gist of things here. And one thing I probably could have made more of there was you actually see I pulled up the tape and repositioned it right after spraying. Now at this point of the video, I just want to thank all of my Patreon and YouTube channel members. I mentioned that I was going to put this mid-roll in future videos in my prior video on this, and I had to add a few more names onto the list since then, so thank you so much to all of you. Your help at this time is very much appreciated. If you are able to become a channel member, it really does contribute a huge amount to me being able to keep the channel going, and at the moment it's my preferred platform for support. Onto the splinter pattern. You can see I've masked the pattern in outline and I've not filled everything in with tape as I was more interested in doing this quickly rather than well, and again relying on brush control to prevent overspray, which will prove to be a mistake, but it did allow me to show correcting that later, so it's all good really. After a long spraying session, because of trying to be careful, I'm just immediately going into removing the masking. I'm again showing you the whole process here to show you that I didn't do anything special. I wasn't being super careful or delicate or use some special technique, I just removed the tape as I normally would. I also think it's really satisfying watching something being unmasked, so enjoy. When I'm done with that, I do stop and talk about the finish, but then I realise I've missed some tape, so here's that last piece being removed at just a 2x speed, and then I'll make the points I was going to. Firstly, Outlaw Paints have a really nice smooth finish, which I'll talk about later when we come to decals. Secondly, you can clearly see I wasn't careful enough with my spraying, and have overspray on the RLM02. I should have just spent a few more minutes filling this in with tape, it would have been quicker in the long run. Anyway, with this self-lesson in patience behind me, it's time to continue on with the RLM71, but this time in the form of the fuselage side mottling to blend that harsh line between the upper and lower markings. This again is made easier because we're using a lower pressure than we would with an aqueous paint, so this is pretty simple. I only filmed half the camo here before the battery on the camera died and the recording stopped, so we'll just double the 3 minutes it took for this half for the overall figure that we'll be tallying later. It's a bit more than it really took, but I'm erring on the side of caution. Right, back to the RLM02 again, and the first job I have is to tidy up those areas of overspray from my less than careful application of the dark green. Once that's complete, it's onto the completion of the camouflage with the RLM02 Mottle. I really enjoy Luftwaffe Mottle schemes, but sometimes actually doing the Mottle can be a bit of a pain because if you don't get your paint consistency right, you can easily get spidering or splittering. This again is minimised with the lacquer because of its properties of low viscosity, low spraying pressure and short drying time. So on to decaling. And normally I'd reach for my trusty pledge here, but I'm just going to use water in this case because of that very even finish from the paint. I'll just demonstrate that here with the upper wing crosses. With a nice smooth finish and just water, it's really easy to move the decals about to position them, and then it's just a matter of removing the water to really bed those down. I'd also forgotten about the tape over the rear band, so I'm just removing it here before carrying on. Okay, let's look at our total times here. It took just under 2 minutes to spray the yellow identification bands, and almost 3 minutes to spray the undersides and fuselage in light blue. We then had another 3 minutes, mainly down to putting paint back and cleaning out the airbrush, before I started masking over that to put down the upper surface colours. I then spent just over 2.5 minutes spraying this with a delay of 3.5 minutes before masking that top coat for the splinter pattern colour. I then spent 11 minutes trying to be careful spraying the splinter and mottling the sides. The final RLM02 cleanup of Mottle took almost 4.5 minutes. In total, that gives a shade under 23 minutes of spraying, with 6.5 minutes of waiting between coats before masking, or just under 30 minutes all in. If I had fully masked the upper wings, I'd have probably shaved 2.5 to 3 minutes off that time, although it would have taken a minute or so for the extra tape application. Anyway, let's have a look at the completed model, with all decals, fully assembled and with a flat coat on. Now this model isn't going to win any competition medals, but that's not what it's for. I wanted to showcase the paints, and how I see them fitting to my, and maybe your, workflow. I've done no weathering, shading, panel lining, or anything else other than paint, decals and flat coat here. I achieved that in the shortest time I ever have on a model outside of my 1-hour challenges, and I wasn't rushing about like I do on those. Outlaw Paints have, however, massively impacted my modelling workflow, which is why I've adopted them and took them on as a range in my shop. So let's go back to the 3 things I wanted to demonstrate here with Outlaw Paints: ease of use, speed, and durability. Many of these are characteristics of lacquer paints in general, but I think they're even more applicable to Outlaw, and I'll highlight why I think so shortly. Firstly, the ease of use of Outlaw Paints comes from the fact that, like many other lacquer paints, they come ready to use. They also mix quickly and easily, usually a couple of shakes and you're ready to go, rather than having to shake the bottle for ages to homogenise the paint. They also have a wide range, which means you're able to get a close paint match for the colour you're looking for, as I mentioned in my last video talking about freeing yourself from that paint by numbers philosophy. The second is speed. You saw how quickly Outlaw paints dry, but that's only part of the speed piece. Another part of it is being lacquer paints. They're chemically hot to styrene, meaning you get a strong chemical bond almost instantly. It's a bit like spraying your model with pigment in Tamiya Extra Thin. Just for the record, don't try that. The next factor in speed is their high pigment density, which is important in any quality paint, and here it means you can achieve good, solid colour in pretty much a single pass, with maybe a touch-up to follow depending on your airbrush skills. Less coats or passes means you're using less volume of paint, you're spending less time spraying and not building up solvent on the model, meaning those short drying times. The last factor in speed I'll also talk about in durability, but it's that ability to mask so quickly onto painted surfaces, meaning you're not waiting around for the model to dry for long periods of time between coats. The most remarkable thing to me about lacquer paints, and specifically Outlaw in this case, is their hardness and their adhesion to the model. Prior to this, even after priming a model, I'd never before have dreamed of spraying an aqueous acrylic emulsion of any sort and masking it within a few minutes. If I did, I'd expect that paint to be 90% adhered to the tape when it came time to unmasking. Even leaving them to cure overnight, lifting of spots and flakes is still sometimes an issue using tape masks on aqueous acrylics. So this durability of lacquer paints has a huge impact on the overall speed of your project. I was able to completely paint this 109 from unprepped completed model to fully painted in about 45 minutes, including masking. That's a complete game changer. Likewise, being able to slop a wash on a paint job a couple of minutes after painting it and not have to worry about it binding or lifting is great. It really unlocks a whole new set of possibilities with projects. So that's it for my first look on Outlaw Paints, but you'll see them a lot more in my builds from now on, since they've become my go-to first stop choice for paints. Of course, I do stock the military range in my shop, and those are now also on the web store if you'd like to try them for yourself. That's all for this instalment of Man's Model Moments. If you enjoyed the video, please click the like button, subscribe to the channel for more like it, and share this video with others you think would also enjoy it. You can also follow me on Instagram, Twitter and Facebook, and if you're feeling generous then I also have a Patreon, which is absolutely the best way of helping me to grow the channel and produce more content like this. With that, I hope you have plenty of modelling moments of your own, and I look forward to welcoming you on the next video.